Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano. I know it's been a while. I've been busy. I've been doing a lot of things. You can still see I'm working on an animation back here. Hopefully that releases someday. I don't know. I got a lot going on, but I figured I should take the time to do at least an episode. So I'm going to be talking about an adult animated feature, recent release. As of this moment, it's only been out for one day, but I'm sure once this video goes up, it's been out for a while. The Genndy Tartokovsky animated feature film, Fixed. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. A lot of you are probably unaware of this movie. It's not that it hasn't gotten any kind of wide release or anything. It's on Netflix, so it's widely available for you to watch. It's just that Netflix kind of sucks at promoting their stuff. A lot of movies just come out, get buried, we forget about them. You know the whole thing with Netflix. While a lot of people do like Genndy Tartokovsky's work, I mean, he's the guy who created Dexter's Lab, Samurai Jack. He was responsible for the Hotel Transylvania movies. When you're on Netflix, there's no guarantee that you're going to get any attention. I kind of have to remind myself that there's a show on here from the creator of the Powerpuff Girls. Even though I'm a big fan of Craig McCracken's work, that's kind of how bad it is. You just forget what's on Netflix, but I'm not here to complain about Netflix. I'm just kind of setting this up. So, Fixed. For those of you unaware, this is an adult animated feature, so if you're thinking about watching it with your kids, I really recommend not. Like, at the very least, if they're teenagers, they might get something out of if they're teenagers, because a lot of it is the crude humor that you kind of expect from adult animation or just adult comedies in general. It's a raunchy sex comedy about a dog who finds out he's about to get neutered, so his friends essentially give him one last hurrah before that happens, all while the dog is trying to work up the courage to finally admit his love for his neighbor, who is a show dog. Fairly simple premise. Kind of cute at times, I'm not gonna lie. The whole thing with the romance, I actually thought was one of the movie's highlights. And it's one of the things that I think might get your attention if you're not into the gross humor. But for the most part, I do think that if you're not into raunchy humor, if you're not into sex comedies, you can skip this one. I like Genndy Tartokovsky. I think he makes a lot of great work, and normally I would recommend any of his stuff to anyone. But in this scenario, there is a limit to who's going to enjoy it and who won't. Unfortunately, a lot of people won't. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that's a huge mark against this movie. I think we as a society need to accept that sometimes there are movies that not everyone's gonna like, but it's tailored to our specific interests. I feel like way too many people forget that. I feel like way too many people often take what essentially is our own interests and mark all art based on that criteria. And we forget to acknowledge, like, look, this is in terms of how I feel about it. It doesn't mean that that's how everyone feels about it. I mean, of course, there is a certain point where you have to kind of assert yourself and acknowledge, like, this is a good piece of art, this is a bad piece of art, but there is kind of that moment where you have to acknowledge, like, well, this is technically well made, it's just that it isn't for me. In this case, this is a well-made movie. The animation's great on it, the cast is really good. Like, you know, a lot of times you forget that these people are who they are, and, you know, you just get sucked into the voices that they create for these characters. Like, this is one of those instances where, I mean, I've, of course, talked about it before, where I don't really care about celebrity voice actors, but this is one of those instances where I would definitely say, like, yeah, if you want a good example of how celebrity voice actors can still work, this is definitely a movie where I say, yeah, you know, as much as a lot of the humor will probably turn off a lot of people, I do think just the performances given by the actors who are here really showcases just how you can have a good celebrity voice cast in your movie, because the actors do get lost in the roles they do. Like, the only actor that I was constantly reminded of, like, oh, that's who that is, was just Idris Elba, who plays essentially the main character's best friend, and that's because Idris Elba has a very distinct voice, but he's still doing a really good vocal performance. I mean, this is a guy who's done a lot of voice performances already. As of this point, he was, of course, Knuckles for the Sonic movies. He was in Zootopia. He's done a lot of voice work, so he's probably gotten used to doing this kind of thing. But then you get other people in here like Adam Devine, who plays the main character Bull, Kathryn Hahn, who plays his love interest. You could easily be like, oh, this is just going to sound like the celebrities doing their voices, and it's not going to sound like characters. But because of how committed they are to doing the performance, you kind of forget that. Like, it really does feel like they become their characters, which is always appreciated. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed this movie. I do think that there are some issues, and I will get to that, but as much as I enjoy it, like I said, I understand it's not going to be for everyone. Not everyone likes raunchy comedies. I kind of do, but even I have my limits on it. This one, kind of did enough to make it stand out and make it enjoyable, even if it got a little far at times. Like, the sex, the shit, the nastiness overall did kind of go a little far sometimes, but I never really felt like it distracted from the heart of the story, which is essentially what it feels like. Is like, even though it's supposed to be a dog getting neutered, it almost feels like a bachelor party in a way. It almost feels like this is a guy who's growing up, having one last night with his friends before he has to say goodbye to his childhood in a way, if that makes sense. And in that regard, I do think when you see it through those lenses, you can kind of see where some of the charm is at. I don't think it necessarily negates your feelings. Like, if you don't like the sex humor, I don't think it's gonna necessarily change the fact that, like, hey, this movie opens up with the main character humping his owner's grandma's knee or anything like that. But it, at the very least, is gonna give you something to kind of care about. And I think that's what really matters here, is that as long as you have that emotional thing that you connect to, you might get something out of it, but I understand if not. Sometimes, like I said earlier, you do have to acknowledge that something is well made, it just isn't for you. For example, I'm not a fan of Paw Patrol because I'm too old to watch Paw Patrol, but I see clips here and now and then of the movie, which has gotten some praise, and I'm like, okay, don't really care about it, but I can see how a kid would like that. Rom-coms that I'm like, don't really see the appeal to. I'm not a big rom-com guy. I do like romance in movies, but, rom-coms in general, I just feel like a lot of it is like, okay, well, that's not really targeted towards me. That's targeted more towards like a woman. That's kind of I don't want to say stereotype, but I do feel like, that's, painting it a little shallow, but to an extent, that's kind of the audience that these movies are going for, if you really think about it. And in that regard, I just feel like, yeah, some of these do not care for it. Like, I do not care for The Notebook. I do not care for Twilight. But I can acknowledge, like, okay, I get why these movies connect with the audiences that they connect with. And I think that really matters. Like, I'll still mark them as negative for my own sake. But I will say, I'm like, hey, if you're into this, I can see the appeal. And that's an important thing to have when you grow up or when you're into art. It's like, okay, acknowledging that just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it's impossible for anyone else to like it. You can still put it in saying like, hey, I don't recommend this, but I do think you have to at least be honest and acknowledge like, hey, I don't see the appeal to it, but I can kind of see the appeal for another audience. I felt this way when it came to Five Nights at Freddy's. That first movie I thought was well made. Like the animatronics were great. The actors were putting their all. Everything was well done. It's just that I really didn't care for it. I'm not a Five Nights at Freddy's guy. The scares weren't really all that there. I kind of wanted it to be more like a slasher. I kind of wanted it to have more gore and whatnot. But I had to acknowledge, like, well, the audience for these movies are going to be kids. And on top of that, it's kids who have played the games, and this is not how the games play out. I do hope that for the sequel, they do a little bit more to kind of hook me in. And that's another thing that I will say, is that even if something isn't entirely for me, it is, of course, great when it can find a way to hook me in. But if it doesn't, as long as it's doing what it's doing right, I can't really knock it as an entirely bad movie. Like, I could say, like, it's bad for me, but I will acknowledge at the very least, like, well, for what it's worth, for the audience it's for, I do understand why it's grabbing them. And again, that's kind of how I feel about this movie with Fixed. Look, granted, I am the audience that is, grabbed by it. The animation is really good. It makes it really funny. There's a whole sequence towards the end of the movie. And just to be clear, I'm not going to spoil too much of the movie because it is a recent release. But I don't know if there's really that much that I can spoil. Just from the knowledge, okay, this is a movie about a dog that is going to lose his balls and he's gonna have fun, get into debauchery, sex, all that stuff. You probably already can figure out where some of this stuff is going. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but I will spoil some aspects of it. Like, there's a scene towards the end where there's a strip club and there's a bear stripping, and the bear is animated really well. Like, and the whole movie is animated really well. And what makes it funny is that just seeing this bear doing like this whole strip tease, just dancing, he's bouncing around and whatnot. It is really nice animation that makes it a lot funnier to watch because of that. But I do get why some people won't like it, and I do think that is an example of where they could have dialed it back and it probably would have been funnier, because while the bear dancing around is funny, they also animate how its balls are big and bouncing around with it, and I'm kind of like, I don't know if you needed to animate the balls. I don't know, I feel like you could have done it. Like, it's still in a very adult scene. Like, I'm not going to be showing a kid a bear striptease scene. It's just that now with the balls, it's like, oh yeah, I definitely can't show it to a kid. I don't know, like I said, it was already adult enough as it was. You didn't really need to animate it like that, but at the same time, I can't deny that I get laughs out of that. And then, there's stuff like that throughout the movie. There's a bunch of sexual acts. Climax of this movie has, honestly, something that was very nasty, but I was kind of laughing really hard at, where the main character kind of does an act of love or sacrifice or whatever you want to put it for his love interest. It's, again, really nasty because it's a sexual act that you don't want to see in a cartoon, but at the same time, I can't deny it's very funny, and it's something that I won't forget. Also, it's gonna be something that'll probably offend some people, because aside from the fact that it's very nasty, very sexual, it's essentially rape. But I'm like, you know what, there's a whole thing where it leads up to it. It's not like you're supposed to take it that seriously. I understand if that is not for you. I kind of think at a certain point you really do have to acknowledge, though, that, hey, this is a goofy comedy, so, sure, whatever. But yeah, it's just stuff like that. I mean, I like the cast in it, like I said earlier. The other friends that the main character Bull has, aside from, having like the Idris Elba character, he has one that's voiced by Bobby Monahan and another one that's played by Fred Armisen. The most memorable one of the bunch is the Idris Elba character, because he's like the big tough dog. The other ones where it's like, here's the weird dog that eats shit, and it's just like, we don't know what his deal is. And then you got the essentially the Twitter dog, or the TikTok dog, if you want to call it that, because one of the dogs in there is like, he's wearing glasses, he's wearing human clothes, which, we've seen that before. And on top of that, he's always walking on two legs, because he's like always like ready for his owner's videos. That's kind of funny. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this movie, it reminded me of a lot of like older animated stuff, and not just because it was 2D, which beautifully animated in 2D. I mean, I've already complimented it before, but I just want to make that clear. It is a beautiful animated 2D feature. It's obviously in the style of Genndy Tartokovsky, which, if you've seen like Samurai Jack, Dexter's Lab, his style. But seeing it with this much money thrown into it, like, the characters move very well, like there's always something going on. It's just really great stuff. Even if some of it is nasty, like, seeing balls jump around, I can't deny that it is very well animated, and that alone, I think, is worth recommending if you're an animation fan. Like, even if you don't like this kind of movie, I'm like, okay, at least watch it for the animation, and, you might get something out of it, especially, like, if you're the kind of person who likes studying animation. I think you will get something out of that part. Beyond that, I do think it has elements that feel like an older animated feature, or shorts or whatever, in regards to how we never actually see the people in this movie. All the people are always kind of shot in that way of like with Tom and Jerry, or like Cow and Chicken, or well, not Cow and Chicken, but you know the adults were in that. But you know, like the whole thing where it's like you only see the humans from like the waist down. You can hear them talk, but you never actually see their faces. There's maybe like one or two shots in this movie that I remember where you actually see a full human, and it's kind of like the whole thing with 101 Dalmatians where the humans look like they're dogs. This is during like the whole dog show, because there's a dog show scene in this. And yeah, in that regard, it's really cool. Like it reminds me of that stuff. The comedy, when it's not being nasty, is very slapstick heavy. There's some dialogue stuff in there too, but a lot of it is, of course, raunchy sex comedy dialogue. But there's a lot of chemistry in there. There's like a scene early on where the main character, Bull, you know, played by Adam Devine, talks to his love interest, Honey, played by Catherine Hahn, and there's just a lot of good chemistry. Like, even though they're essentially talking about like fucking turkeys and stuff like that, I'm like, I really enjoy what these characters are saying and what they're doing, just because there's like a rhythm to the way they're talking to each other, and the animation complements it so well that you kind of forget that they're saying this nasty stuff. Now, of course, like I said before, Fixed is not a perfect movie. It is something that goes a little too far sometimes. I do think, while I can handle a lot of the sex jokes in there, there's a certain moment where I'm like, okay, you're not being adult, you're just being immature. And that's kind of where the movie starts to falter a bit. It's like, okay, you didn't need to animate the balls all that often. It just feels like, you know, you're overdoing it. Like, I don't even mind the fact that at some point, you know, the main character imagines his balls as like actual characters. That I don't mind. It's like, okay, you know, you're doing it for a joke, it's good, it's fine. But there's times where it's like the character's just walking around and we're seeing it, and it's like, why? We don't really need that. Some of the dialogue really does feel like we're saying fucking shit, not because the script demands it, but because we know that we got the R rating, so we might as well throw it in as much as possible. Essentially, it reminds me a lot of just like an actual kid that just realized that these things exist, and, you know, all in on saying these words, not because they found a way to, you know, express themselves, but because they think it's funny. And unfortunately, a lot of it is not funny. I can understand to an extent that some animators working on this might have found it funny, just because, like, hey, we normally don't do this, we're normally doing kid stuff, so having the freedom to do these things makes it a little more fun to do. But I don't know, it's not something that I really care for. Not to make this into a comparison video, but I do think, going by Sony's last R-rated animated feature, which was Sausage Party, I preferred that, mainly because while it is another movie that deals with sex and it's character swearing and whatnot, I feel like that one restrained itself a little bit more, and that's probably because it was done by people who are normally more associated with R-rated features. You know, you had Seth Rogen involved with it and whatnot, and because of that, they knew when to dial it back a little bit. It still goes too far in some scenes, but I feel like when it goes too far in that movie, it's more justified than it is with this movie, which kind of sucks, because I do think that animation-wise, Fixed is a much better animated movie. Not just because I prefer 2D, but because the 2D is done really well versus Sausage Party, where the CG was bad even for its time. I mean, it was decent, like it's watchable CG, but it's not anything that, you know, is truly amazing CG. And, you know, of course, the character designs and Fixed, even ignoring how they're animated, just the character designs themselves is much better. But as a movie as a whole, I think Sausage Party worked better because it actually knew when to dial it back, and knew how to use it, and it was trying to say something with its language, with its with the sex and with everything. Like, it was making a comment about religion, it was poking fun at Pixar movies. It was doing a lot that I think just handled way better. But again, I don't want to make this into a comparison video. I do think that for what Fixed does, it mostly succeeds. It doesn't really fail all that often. It's just that I do wish that I had dial it back, not just because I think it goes a little too nasty, but because I just don't think it needed to be there. I do like the idea that, in a way, we're kind of viewing this from the perspective of dogs, so I kind of get them being like this because, like, hey, dogs have more of a one-track mind compared to humans, so it makes sense that they'd be thinking about more of these things than we would. But again, it needed a better balance. I do find it kind of interesting that this is technically not the first R-rated dog feature within this decade. We had Strays, which was a live-action movie, very reminiscent of stuff like Homeward Bound. They were swearing, talking about sex, but more so it was just swearing. It wasn't really as focused on this. Like, I'm not gonna be saying that this is that movie. Like I said, that one was more of a Homeward Bound thing. This one is just one last night with your boys. It's essentially a bachelor party movie. But with Strays, it's still coming from the same kind of place in terms of the humor. The characters are swearing. A lot of it felt like it was unnecessary. Between the two of them, I do think this is the better one just because it is animated. You get away with a lot more fun things to look at versus with Stray, since it was live action. The dogs are much more limited in terms of reaction. So it's very much carried by the dialogue. I will say, though, it is kind of interesting that they both have similar things, and not just because the dogs are swearing, but because at a certain point in both movies, they're at a pound, and their method of escape involves bodily humor, though in different ways. And Strays, they get all the dogs to shit. In this movie, all the dogs start peeing, and I do think that this movie does it better just because the animation and the music that plays, it's a lot funnier. But it is interesting to note that little thing. I do kind of wonder if, especially given how long this thing's been in production. I mean, I remember hearing this was, at least moving forward as early as like 2020, or probably even earlier than that, really. And I know that it's something that Genndy has been wanting to do for years, even before that. So I do kind of wonder if at some point the people involved with that movie looked at the script for this and, kind of took some ideas. Like, I'm not to the point that I'm saying that that movie is a ripoff of this or that this movie is a ripoff of that, but I do think that knowing that this was in production for so long and then seeing another movie that uses a similar thing with, the same animals, I do wonder if something was there. Like, there was some kind of overlap, which, happens sometimes. But again, I do prefer Fixed over Strays. Strays is a fine movie, but I do think that, without the good animation, it's carried by the writing entirely, and because much like this movie, it forces a lot of the humor. It can't be as forgiven as Fixed is. I do think that despite how raunchy it can get, there is heart. I like the fact that the main character and his love interest have, a lot of chemistry. Like, you kind of want to see more scenes with them together. I enjoyed a lot of the humor in it. I wish that part of the reason why I wish that it wouldn't go all in on some of this stuff is just because there are some really great bits that I think work more if it's more shocking. Like the sacrifice that Bull, the main character, does for his love interest. It's funny, but it would have landed a lot more and it would have been more shocking if they had held back a little bit from some of the sexual stuff earlier. But it's still pretty effective. I'm not gonna lie on that. It's still pretty effective. I don't know. I enjoyed Fixed. I know some people are ready to be all like, oh, well, this is like the Sony misstep. They just had K-pop Demon Hunters, which was also on Netflix. Sony has got to start releasing their animated movies in theaters. I'm sorry. These movies would have benefited from a theatrical release. But people are like, oh, that was the great one and this is the shit one. I'm like, look, admittedly, K-pop Demon Hunters is a much better movie. I think it's probably the best animated feature I've seen in 2025 so far. But Fixed is still a fun movie. At the end of the day, that's what matters. And I still love Genndy Tartokovsky's work. I don't know. I think that the movie works fine. And I do recommend it with an asterisk. I do think if you're a big animation fan, watch it for the animation. Otherwise, if you're into raunchy comedies, this is definitely a good one to watch. If you're not into raunchy comedies, you might want to skip this. I think that you might get something out of it because there is enough in there that works. But I fully understand if it just doesn't work for you. It's a fun movie. I enjoyed it. I think it's worth watching, but I can't recommend it to everyone. And that's perfectly fine. If nothing else, I just appreciate that Sony is still doing wildly different things. I would have liked to have seen it in theaters, not just because, it's a fun movie, but because 2D really needs a win in theaters, and it would have been nice to see this. I don't know if it would have been a big hit, but at least it could have been like a decent enough one. If nothing else, I do hope that they consider doing another 2D feature, and maybe that one gets into theaters. Who knows? I don't know. It's a fun movie, and I definitely think it's worth watching if you're into this kind of stuff. If you're not, give it a shot, as long as you're open enough to it. In any case, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time, whenever that comes.
Oh, are you thinking about Nana, or should I be flattered?
Gotta go, that's my walk.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.